diabetes research. I've also worked hard to increase funding for Alzheimer's research and to strengthen support for family caregivers. We are making progress, but there's much to do if we are to ensure that the coming generations of seniors realize the American dream in their golden years. Hard work should be rewarded with a comfortable retirement. The discussions you will have today advance that cause. Thank you and have a great conference.
So, I had a chance to talk this morning to a couple of the people who are here about the issue of getting the general attention of the public and the business field to pay attention to the economics of the aging issue over the next 3 decades. You may have seen an article on Monday talking about an effort that the Maine Development Foundation and the Maine State Chamber put together, declaring that they found a solution to our workforce issue by bringing in 65,000 people or whatever. I just want to go on the record as saying I don't think we found a solution, so don't assume that the problem is solved. A lot of their projections are pretty idealistic, and I don't think we're going to solve the problem. But you'll hear what the problem is today, and that's one of our objectives. Just so you know, a little bit, MemoryWorks is a very new nonprofit that we started earlier this year with the intention of setting up memory cafes around the state. We've got 8 already this year, and we've probably got a backlog of 30 or 35 that people have requested. Memory cafes are intended as a social gathering opportunity for people who have dementia of some sort. So feel free to make referrals to us. It's a really a cup of coffee and some good conversation, and it's a place where anybody with any difficulties with memory or cognitive impairment can come and have some like-minded people to talk to. Let me see if I can figure this one out. So on the agenda, we're going to start off with Julie Fralich of the Muskie School. And as you all know, the Muskie School is the premier source of a lot of research in this state, and Julie has really worked very hard to bring a lot of that information forward. There's a chart book which she has a few copies of, but certainly on the website. And Julie's just been leading the issue with the aging research. Then we're going to jump into, Julie's going to talk about the workforce, meaning that the problem that we face with 200,000 people retiring out of the workforce, and all those people waiting at our borders to come in and become part of Maine and the future workforce. And I say that facetiously because we don't have a waiting list for people coming to Maine yet. Then we're going to branch into a presentation by Pam Villarreal, who's here from Texas, from the National Center for Policy Analysis. When I wanted to put together this conference, I searched Google religiously for quite a while to find somebody who had done some study of the change in spending that occurs when somebody goes from a paycheck to a retirement check. And so Pam's going to address some of that, but I think there's one issue which may not have been addressed, and that has to do with taxes and the impact of aging on the tax base. And we'll see where at the end of the day, I can talk a little bit more about that. But we got a long ways to go. And then we're going to have a box lunch or lunch in room 110. At that time, I would encourage you to meet with the vendors and talk to some of the folks in the lobby and enjoy the great blues harmonica of Myron Samuels. Myron is a guy who has a blues show on WMPG right across the street every Wednesday from 5 to 7. And he's from the Department of Labor, believe it or not. And he every summer, every Wednesday in summer, you'll find him up at Monument Square just sitting there playing. on his own time, not state time. But he's known for his harmonica playing and has a pretty good following. He's a good friend of mine. Then just after lunch, we're going to talk to Lynn Peel and Nova Evers of Beach Glass Transitions. They've been working with businesses to help them understand and deal with and find solutions for what's called a sandwich generation. That's the employee who has kids and child care and parents living at home, so elder care. So they're caught between two roles and a full-time job. And somewhere along the way, the business community is going to have to make an adjustment because there are going to be a lot more of them over the next 3 decades. And they do need to take time away from work, more than probably what most businesses are comfortable with right now. So there's going to have to be a little bit of a change in philosophy about how businesses treat people, because even the Family Medical Leave Act doesn't really do it for people who are caught in that situation with full-time jobs and full-time caregiving roles. And then we've invited Judy Klinko from Tucson to come and talk to us about one possible way to deal with one of the workforce issues. And that workforce issue is essentially that half of the direct care workers here in Maine are going to retire over the next 10 years. So we've got a lot of people, 200,000 people moving into the over 65 age group over the next 10 years, and we got half the number of workers to take care of the people who need that. You'll hear at the end of the day, Genworth's presentation should tell you that something like 23% of the people over 65 will eventually need long-term care, if not more. So we're going to have a real shortage of workers to take care of our elder citizens. And there's also concern about number of beds. So Judy's going to tell us how they sort of solved this a little bit in Arizona through what's called the Caregiver Training Institute. And, you know, for the price of a study here in Maine, we could start up a caregiver training institution, and I'm referring to the $1 million study that the governor just requested. And then Brenda Gallant, who is I'm proud to say, our overseer of the long-term care facilities here in Maine. She's the ombudsman person for everybody, and she has a tremendous staff that is just terribly busy all the time. And she believes that we should get the word out, let people know that there's going to be concerns down the road, because if we're overcrowded in our beds, we're going to have a lot of additional problems. And then we're going to end the day with what I think is probably, I'm hoping will be a little bit of controversy in the form of the Genworth financial presentation winning in the second half. And I say controversy because for the past 6 to 9 months, all I've heard about is the topic of aging in place. And people say the aging in place, keeping people at home and doing home care, and the cost of that is cheaper than assisted living. But Genworth studies show that the cost of assisted living is actually cheaper than aging in place. So that disagrees with the common thread that you'll hear over and over and over again. This next 2 years, you're going to hear aging in place and senior villages, and all about keeping people out of an institutional setting and keeping them at home. The question there is, can we afford that kind of care, or are people actually better off making that transition at an earlier stage in their life? It is very traumatic for those of us who are approaching old age. It's very traumatic to make a move when you're least capable. When you get ill and you have to move from home to an institution, you've got too many things to deal with, including the possible loss of a loved one, certainly not the full-time care. So it's a traumatic time when somebody gets old and has to move away from familiar things. And then I'll talk at the end a little bit more about defining the problems that need to be carried forward, because our future conversations will we'll deal with finding solutions for those problems. So what is old? What is aging? How do you know when you're old or not? And I gave this a lot of thought, because you don't get old just because you retire. You don't get old just because you get gray hair. There are some people I know who are 93 who are just as young and spry. And I'll give you the best example of what's not old, and that's Betty White. Betty White's, in some people's terms, ancient, but she's more active than most of us. So how do you know when you're old? And old is basically that point in time when aging begins to have a negative effect on your activities of daily living, on whether you can take care of yourself without too much assistance. So that's when you know you're kind of getting old, but you still try to be active, and old people don't like to be called old. They don't like to be called senile. So the old characteristic of memory loss, when somebody's getting older and they start to experience cognitive impairment, that doesn't mean they're old. It just means there's something medical going on. It's a myth that you lose memory just because you get old. So we'll talk a little bit about that in future presentations. I want to thank Bangor Savings for helping to sponsor this. They've been a really big advocate for this forum and for this issue. One of the things we won't talk about today is the impact, or won't talk too much, I think Julie will talk about it a little bit, the impact of one major illness on your retirement fund. And this says it all. One major illness like Alzheimer's will turn your retirement fund into an empty jar. And a lot, as Dan Doherty of Edward Jones may tell you later, and Genworth, you know, there's been some bad planning in the past for retirement accounts. And so they spend a lot of their time trying to fix the bad advice from the past. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later on. That's our board. That's who MemoryWorks is right now. We are looking for people who are really interested in the issues that we talk about today and in finding solutions and actually taking action. It's one thing to talk about it, and as I say to everybody I meet, we've discussed aging and the impact, the economic impact of aging on more than one occasion. As best as I can find, there were studies in 93, 99, 2003, 2007, 2009. We passed the state plan on aging in 2012. And so here we go again. We need to move from talk to action. And that's one of the objectives of MemoryWorks over the next 2 years, is to move from talk to action. We don't know how exactly that's going to happen, but that's our objective. I want to give special thanks to Donna Beveridge, who's been, and she's terribly embarrassed that I'm saying this, but Donna has been a right-hand person for the past year on the memory cafes and a lot of other things, and so special thank you, Donna. Now she's really embarrassed. So let's start off. Let me introduce Julie Fralich of the Muskie School. And listen to some of the things that Julie has to offer in the workforce issues, the general economics, and some of the impact of a dementia-based illness, for example, on what that does for aging and retirement. Julie, are you ready?
Good morning. A little bright up here. I know it's cold outside. A little shocking to get up in the morning. 19 degrees. I was hoping for a few more days of warmth, but I guess you can't always have that. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I don't know if I'm embarrassed or pleased that I've been in this work for such a long time. And there's still so much more work to do. I will just reflect on. Someone talk to me? That's the wrong presentation. I'd love to do that, but that was not be mine. Okay. We can switch it out, or I can pretend, but I probably wouldn't do a very good job with that. But I was reflecting a little bit on, what has happened many good things have happened over the last 20 years. I remember 20 years ago, my mother actually was diagnosed with dementia at age 65, 66. And at that time, there was no Alzheimer's Association in the state of Maine. And you would call Marilyn, I can't remember her last name, but she was the founder of the Maine Alzheimer's Association, and she lived in Scarborough, and she just sat in her home and would take phone calls from people. And that was really the beginning. And I actually remember 1985-ish, one of the first articles I ever saw in either Time or Newsweek on Alzheimer's, was a big headline. And in those days, it was, organic brain syndrome. It wasn't dementia. And there were no assessment units or geriatric assessment units. We were told not to discuss it with my mother. Don't talk to her about having dementia. And so we didn't. And that was very, very painful on reflection. So since that time, many, many things have happened. And I think we should reflect a little bit on some of the wonderful things that have happened. And certainly there's much more that needs to be done. But I just was reflecting on that as I was preparing for this presentation today. You probably hear more factoids today than you'll know what to do with. That's kind of what I do. But I thought I would try and provide a foundation for the conversation today to begin to understand sort of what this means for Maine, the aging of the population, what it means for our rural areas, what it means for our workforce. And hopefully some of this information will be foundational for the conversation today and going forward. So I'm going to start with a lot of sort of demographics, income kinds of information, much of which people know or have heard sort of on the surface, but dig down a little bit into that in terms of understanding where some of those impacts may be more prominent in different parts of the state. We've just done some work looking at the cost of dementia care. We're about to release another report on that. We haven't released it yet, but we have some early information on the cost of dementia care, for at least in the publicly funded long-term care programs. We've done a couple surveys of the direct care workforce and what are some of the challenges in the direct care workforce. And then just talk a little bit, I know Ken mentioned all the studies that have been done, and I can mention more that people are doing, but just to lay the foundation for people are thinking about these things. I think taking things from plan to action is always the challenge. And you take baby steps and you work slowly but surely towards those goals. Let's see now, there we go. So this is everyone knows this, but just sort of the stark reality of it is that in Maine, the 65 and older age group is going to account for most of the growth in our population in the next 10 years. So we're going to go from 226,000 people over 65 to 330,000 people over 65, with very little growth in the under 65 population. You can see by age group, this shows that these numbers are the number of people in those age groups. So if you look in that 65 to 74 age group, that's the first group that's coming along. Another 72,000 people are going to be in the 65 to 74 age group. So that's the first kind of wave. The striking part of this is that in the 45 to 54 age group, you have a decline. So it's that combination of the increase in the elder and the decrease and the very small increases in the under age 65 that really is the challenge for us. It's not really just increase in older, it's really what's happening in the younger demographics as well. the 65 to 74 age group is actually an interesting group in terms of the human capital that it actually provides to our society, and the opportunities for people who are newly retired to become members of our community and have time to be board members, but they also, in fact, are becoming the caregivers for the 85 and plus. So a lot of dynamics just kind of embedded within this chart. The next one is similar. It just shows the percent change by each of these age groups. So similar storyline. It's 58% increase in that 65 to 74 age group. I think we all grew up kind of thinking of Florida as the older state, and now I think everyone in the news, and we all kind of know Maine now. We're third in percent of people over age 65. But we're the highest in terms of median income, and that's really because of those age groups we saw below the 65 age group. So 16% of our population's over 65. Florida's 17%. West Virginia's 16%. And so definitely we're on the edge of, what it's going to mean for a state across the country to be changing who we are and what we look like. This is just showing, again, Maine versus New England versus the U.S., and we're going to continue to stay as one of the higher states in terms of percent of population over 65. By 2025, we'll be a quarter of our population will be over 65. In New England, it'll be 20, in U.S. 18. So the trends that we've been seeing will continue. Now, this is interesting because there really is a rural impact here in terms of our aging of our population. And I think if you can just kind of look at the colors, so the darker the color, the higher percentage of people who are over 65. And I think we call these kind of the rim counties, Washington, Aroostook, and then you get in the western part of the state. Though if you 2012, and then you see how much darker they get in 2022. And so this is not only sort of an issue of aging in Maine, it's a rural issue as well in terms of what the impact is going to be in those rural areas. Now I'll read some of these, I just kind of highlighted them. So the first column is just the percent change in the number of people over 65 by county. So like York County will have a 77% increase in the number of people over 65. Cumberland County, 63%. Saginaw, Waldo, 73%. That's the percent change. If you look at the next column, you'll see the percent of total population over 65. And again, those are Aroostook, Hancock, Knox, Lincoln, Piscataquis, Waldo, Washington. All our rural counties are the places where we're going to have, more than a quarter of our population over 65. And sometimes it takes, we don't respond until the economic impact starts to hit us. And so I think we'll start to see people doing things differently and making some changes. Now this is always a striking little chart here, and this is what's called the dependency ratio, which is kind of a weird name, but basically this is the number of people that you have who are working, who are age 20 to 64, who are kind of available in your workforce, compared to, for every 100 people you have over 65. So for example, in 1970 in Maine, there were 438 people under 65 for every 100 people over 65. And now we're down to, I guess it's about 382 and heading downward. Again, because of those trends in terms of the younger population not growing and the older population growing. So the number of people available to provide care and to work in our workforce is declining. That's if you assume that everybody who's working is under 65. I think we're going to see, as the retirement age grows, and people are living longer and healthier lives, that we're going to see that 65 to 74 age group become an age group that's working and caring for people more and more. In terms of poverty and people over 65, Maine is 9.5% of the people over 65 live below poverty. It's a little bit higher than the New England states, a little bit higher than the U.S. So we have sort of a rural issue, an age issue, and an income issue. And it's interesting, actually, that the percent of people below poverty under 65 is higher than over 65. And it varies by male-female. So as you get older, it's more likely that women are living in poverty and are older. Let's see, did I do that one already? That one? Okay, I think I did that one twice, maybe. Okay. And this is, again, shows how that varies by county. Again, made more impacts in the rural areas than more of the southern and more populated areas. Now, this is also interesting in that there are national surveys done that ask people if they have a disability, and it's a fairly broad definition of disability in terms of impact on people's life, and so it asks questions about ability to, things that interfere with your life. And there's a long definition, but one can look at. But the relationship between income and disability is interesting. So the way to read this, if you just look at the main column and you look at the percent of people over 65, and for those that have incomes below the federal poverty level, more than half, 54%, reported that they had some sort of disability, versus those with incomes above poverty, 36% reported that they had a disability. So you have income also with a strong association with disability, which probably then has a relationship with use of services as well. I told you I was going to give you a lot of factoids here, so hang on. This varies a lot by county. And so again, you'll see, like in Aroostook County, 63% of the people below 65 reported they had a disability, who had incomes below the poverty level. 71% in Washington County, 63% in Waldo County. So lots of differentiation between by income and age and disability. I'm going to shift. That's kind of all the factoids, a lot of which we've heard in the news and things like that. But again, just emphasizing that this is going to be an issue not just in terms of workforce, but in terms of economic development and our economies in our rural areas. I'm going to switch to talking a little bit about dementia and some of the work that we've been doing in this area. According to the Maine Alzheimer's Association, there's about 30,000 people with dementia in Maine, and that's going to increase to 53,000 by 2010. As I mentioned, we've been doing a report on people with dementia who are using publicly funded programs, so people with, basically on Maine Care and state-funded programs in Maine. And we've been able to look at their use of Medicaid and Medicare services, and we've done that by also linking it with their assessment data, so we have a more accurate definition of dementia. And so what we've found just initially is about 7,600 people with dementia or impaired decision-making who are using publicly funded long-term care services in Maine, and that includes people at home, people in nursing homes, people in residential care. And in many ways, our long-term care system is really becoming a dementia care system. So this, again, is just a snapshot of all the people who are getting long-term care services in Maine. These are publicly funded. It doesn't include the private resources that people are using to care for people with dementia. But across all settings, 44% of people have dementia, a diagnosis of dementia. If you add people that have some kind of impaired decision-making skills, that increases to about 66%, or 57%. So really, our long-term care system, and I think people who work in the system probably know this, is very much driven by caring for people with dementia. And I think we kind of know that intuitively, but to sort of have to see the stark reality of that suggests that we really need to be thinking about, how we deliver our services and what's the best way to plan for them. We looked at this by setting, and so we have 3 categories that we looked at: home care, residential care, which in Maine is probably like somewhat like assisted living in other states. Again, these are publicly funded settings. It doesn't include your private pay, and then in a nursing facility. Now, in the home care setting, there are a lot of younger disabled people who get Maine Care services. So this may look smaller than you would expect in terms of people at home, but I think part of it is we have a large number of younger disabled people who are getting home care services, and these people are included here as well. So 14% of people getting services at home, 22% have dementia. It's 22% if you include those that have some sort of impaired decision-making skills. As you move into the residential care setting, that increases to either almost 50% for people with a diagnosis of dementia, and then almost 2/3 of the people if you include people that don't have an explicit diagnosis, but they have some sort of impaired decision-making. And then by the time you get to the nursing home, it's almost 80%. So these numbers are probably higher than some of the ones that have been reported nationally, just because a lot of those data rely on claims, and claims don't always show your diagnosis of dementia. Let's see. Now, there's a score called the Cognitive Performance Score. Think of it as a way to stage the stages of dementia. We use the assessment data to determine sort of what stage of dementia people are at. And so it ranges from a 0 to a 6 in terms of sort of what stage of dementia people are at. So not surprisingly, people at home, about 1/3 of them have sort of mild impairment of dementia, although 17% have moderate to severe dementia even in the home care setting. As you move up into residential care, you'll see a greater proportion in that moderate to severe group, and then in the nursing facility, 32-42% are severely cognitively impaired. So it kind of confirms what you expect, but you can also see that there are people at home and in residential care who are very severely impaired. This is just looking at the people at home who are getting services at home, and the amount of hours of support that they're getting and the different types of support that they're getting. And not surprisingly, the purple line again is the people with dementia. The people with dementia are getting more hours of support with both ADLs, IDLs, emotional support, and large numbers of hours of supervisory support. So again, not surprising, but just confirms and provides documentation of what the trends are in this area. In terms of impact on Maine care, again, purple is people with dementia, and the dark purple are the Maine care dollars, and the light purple are the Medicare dollars. And remember, Maine care is mostly paying for your long-term care, and Medicare is paying for your hospitalizations and acute care. And so, 166 million Maine care dollars are being spent on people with dementia, and about 37 million in Medicare dollars. A large number of the difference here is we have 3,800 people with dementia and 5,300 without dementia, so some of that's just a function of the number of people. But again, just to emphasize that we're talking about a lot of dollars going to caring for people with dementia. Now, this is somewhat this was somewhat surprising to us, and we're actually going to be working with folks at the department and others to come together and kind of help us think through what this means. And I'll tell you how to read it. So the far left-hand side, we looked at the cost per member per month of caring for people with dementia. So this is what that purple with dementia is, and people without dementia. And the top bar, the 1,221, is the Medicare dollars, and the bottom part is the Medicaid dollars. And we put them together so we make sure we capture the whole amount of dollars. But in general, the people with dementia were costing less than the people without dementia on a per month basis. And this was kind of not what we thought we would see. But I'd be interested in, as we talk with others about this, to sort of get their impression as to whether or not this makes sense to them, what the reasons might be. You'll see as you move into the residential and the nursing home, more dollars spent on Medicare, which suggests sort of the hospitalization, rehab, acute care services, and we have a couple of hypotheses as to why that might be, but are sort of looking for input into sort of understanding the dynamics behind some of this. The literature is very varied on this. I think people tend to say people with dementia cost more. If you probably put it all together and sort of grouped it and say, yes, because a large portion of them are in long-term care. But when you sort of control for the setting, we're not seeing the same kind of differences there. However, we also looked at the use of the emergency room by people with dementia in these different settings. There are a couple things to look at. First of all, just in general, you can see that people getting services at home are more likely to have had an emergency room visit than people in residential care and nursing care. They're in residential care and nursing care, they're in a supervised environment, there may be nursing care available. So they're more likely by setting in the home to have gone to an emergency room. But people with dementia are less likely for each setting to have gone to the emergency room. Again, food for thought in terms of what some of the reasons for that might be. If we then look at people with and without dementia who had an inpatient admission, either one or more, or I think we had one or two and then more than two. So in the home care setting, people with dementia were more likely to have had an inpatient admission. 33% of them had one or two inpatient admissions. 41% had at least one. But as you move into the residential care and the nursing facility, they're less likely to have had an inpatient admission. So again, we're just starting to release this information. We're really looking for sort of input and understanding behind it. But beginning to at least tease out kind of what some of the different utilizations are and costs are in these different settings. We saw this is kind of another configuration of what we've been talking about, but it just provides context for the slide after this, which is this just shows, again, the increase in the population over 65 by the different age groups. So you'll see that bottom is the 65 to 74 age group, which is the one that's growing the fastest, the 75 to 84 age group, and then 85 plus age group. And basically what we did is we took these kinds of projections and said, we can look at the prevalence of the use of these long-term care services by these age groups and sort of overlay it on what we're looking at for projections to sort of get some estimates of what the impact of dementia is going to be on the use of services in the future. So we then just looked at some projections on the use of publicly funded services for people with dementia given what the age cohorts were going to be. So again, we're now at about 5,800, and by 2020, we'll move up to 7,000 in estimate people needing long-term care, and 4,000 of those people, if we looked at the current use rates, would be in a nursing facility, 2,200 in residential care. So again, it's going to be a lot of sort of demand placed on our long-term care system. So, you with me? Lots of facts here this morning, but in terms of the workforce, at least in the direct care workforce, we did a couple surveys of the direct care workforce, and one was a survey of providers across all disabilities, so included providers of people with developmental disabilities, as well as older adults. And we also did a survey of personal attendants who work in the consumer-directed programs. So we have a few kind of results related to those different surveys. So again, the provider survey was across a large population of providers, including mental health, developmental disability, physical disability, and brain injury. And the major challenges that were identified by those providers were finding qualified workers, turnover, motivation, compensation, and training. So not unexpected, but again, given the demographics that we have, I think these challenges are going to be continuing. Their recruitment challenges were finding people who could work evenings, weekends, or holidays. Those are willing to work for the wage offered. Those who could work in part-time or intermittent positions and had the skills that they needed. Interestingly, Maine has a number of programs that are called consumer-directed programs within their long-term care system. And those programs are people that basically choose to hire their own workers directly and not go through an agency. So you can hire a family member or a friend. It's a relatively small program, but we surveyed the people that provide care in those programs to get a better understanding of these consumer-directed programs. So in terms of the consumer-directed programs, first of all, 40% were 40 to 59 and 20% were over age 60. So again, you're beginning to see some of the older workforce providing services, and most of these people are providing services for people or family members or friends. The reason that many people became a personal care attendant was because it had a family member or friend who needed care. So there's a strong personal association. 59% said they did it for personal satisfaction. The flexible schedule and the need for income was 37%. So people who are working in this area have very strong commitment to the work and to the people, and have usually worked there for a fair amount of time. They had a high likelihood of working as a personal attendant a year from now. So 79% said they'd probably be doing it in a year. They had worked there for an average of 6 years. Most were family members or friends. Most did not receive as part of their employment any health insurance or unemployment. 37% had health insurance and 28% actually were on Maine care. So it's a very different kind of workforce, but it's something to be keeping an eye on and looking at in the future in terms of opportunities for expanding the workforce through perhaps people that weren't initially trained in that area but got some training and decided they wanted to provide those services. So here we go. Just some summary to kind of wrap up. What does this all mean? You know, in Maine, this is going to mean a lot for our rural areas. And it's probably going to be a lot of stress on them. It's certainly, we have a lot of low-income people who need services, and so it's going to impact our public services. And our long-term care system is really becoming a dementia care system, I would say. I do think that the ability to care for family members or friends through that consumer-directed program is a promising alternative and one that, we should perhaps be promoting more. So again, let's see. Rural areas, everyone knows these things. Transportation's a big issue. Access to services, access to choice of services, availability of services is going to be an issue. There's a lot of work actually being done in various places in terms of making our communities themselves, the physical infrastructure of our communities, be more sort of age-friendly in terms of sidewalks and materials and, just within our towns and villages. And if you look at some of the coastal communities, there's a lot of creative economy going on in those areas as well. A lot of energy being brought to those areas as people retire and are looking to kind of do new things in their lives. And I think we're going to see more and more technological solutions and assistive technology kinds of things in rural areas. I think maybe we'll even hear about some of those this afternoon. In terms of, impact on our incomes and public resources, I'm thinking others will be speaking to this issue, but particularly with the length of time of the dementia disease and the amount of duration of that disease, it can easily, as Ken mentioned, eat up personal resources privately, and then often people need to access public resources. More and more working families, as Ken mentioned, will have the challenges of working and caring for family members, working spouses caring for family members is going to obviously impact the HR processes in our businesses. Let's see, increased pressure. I think we've already covered those areas. The increased number of people with dementia, people are now using the word dementia-capable systems and the need for dementia-capable systems. And I think we're going to have to be sort of overlaying that across our whole sort of economy in terms of what does a dementia-capable and accessible system mean. As I mentioned, 20 years ago with my mom, barely even knew the word, let alone what to do, early stages of dementia versus later stages of dementia. What does it mean in our workplace when people start getting dementia, in our communities, and the impact on caregivers? So what's in the works? This is probably, what Ken is fearful of is that there's a lot of reports and no action. But at least the reports at the national level keep it at least in the national limelight and begin to say, which it hasn't in the past, this is an issue. This is something we need to keep in our forefront. So, there was a Commission on Long-Term Care report to Congress September of this year. There's a national plan to address Alzheimer's disease. There's a state plan to address Alzheimer's disease. And there's a number of state initiatives to look at supporting alternatives for people to be able to get services in the least restrictive setting. And there's a lot going on actually in the direct care workforce in terms of development of training and different kind of career ladders. The national level, a lot of talk about integration of care between the long-term care and the medical system, which historically they've been very divided. The need for creative financing and the need to encourage savings and higher savings for people to care for people. A more sustainable Medicaid program. There's a lot of talk sort of in the policy world about rebalancing our system to make sure that we have a good balance of institutional and non-institutional services, and that we have the quality metrics in order to see how well we're doing. The ones that I think are of most interest, frankly, are on the family caregiving side, where I think, we have tended to look at our long-term care system as a system for caring for the person that has the particular condition, like the person with dementia. But really, I think it's time to look at the unit of people around the person with dementia or anything else, because the caregivers are really, the family caregivers and the friends are really the first line of support. And I think their resources and services for caregivers have been understated, and really need to think about the unit and not just the individual. And also, as you see more and more people, like in the consumer-directed programs, wanting to provide care, we need to provide opportunities, training opportunities, but also sort of creative ways for delegating functions to people, and to create meaningful ladders for career advancement. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about what we're doing in Maine in that regard. There's a national plan, Alzheimer's plan, that is focused on treatment, but also public awareness and tracking progress. There's a state plan, again, to increase awareness. We're trying, Ken's trying. There are a number of state initiatives in our own state of Maine. Maine is one of the states that has a grant called the Rebalancing Initiative, which is to promote greater use of home and community-based services. There's a program that we've been working on relative to personal assistance services, which would basically create a competency-based curriculum for people providing personal care for people with developmental disabilities, mental health, or personal support services, which historically have been 3 different job titles, 3 different training mechanisms, and 3 different career paths, such that historically, if you were trained in one area and you wanted to move over in the other, you had to kind of start over and go down that career path. And we've been working with the state for the last 3 years to develop a common core curriculum that would be available to any one of those job titles, and then with modules that would be available for people depending if they were more interested in working with an older adult or more interested in working with people with disabilities, so that we don't sort of segment our workforce and provide them more opportunities for core curriculum as well as specialization. And it also is being developed as a mixed curriculum, so that part of it is online and is reaching out through the community, university's community, college community system, so that people can do a lot online, and then they come in and do some face-to-face, and then they go back and do it online. So it creates access in rural areas for people that might not otherwise be able to get to an educational institution. And we're just doing the evaluations of that and finalizing that, and it's looking to be very, very successful. Training on dementia for caregivers and throughout the professions. I know there's a lot going on. There's Savvy Caregiver, many people may be familiar with in Maine now, that's offered to caregivers. I know that the nursing and other professions are starting to need to incorporate this into their curriculums as well. As I said, I think we need to be looking at our long-term care system as partly a dementia care system and begin to think about what that means. And then I think others this afternoon will be talking about Maine's Homeward Bound program, which is a program that helps people who are in nursing homes who want to go home, and this really, really interesting work going on in that area as well. So this is, I hope, provided some sort of grounding for the conversation that we're going to have today, and food for thought in terms of what are some of the next steps that we need to be looking at. I do have a lot, if any nighttime reading. We do have a chart book that has a lot of this information in it. Many of you may have seen it, but I have some copies over there if you want to come up and get it. And as I mentioned, the Alzheimer's report is going to be coming out probably sometime in December, early January, and that will be available as well. But I'd be glad to take any questions if people have them. Don't all speak at once. Yes, ma'am. I mean, I'm sure there are others here clinically who could speak to that. I use the word Alzheimer's or other dementia because there are different forms of dementia with different causes, and so we've kind of grouped them together if they had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or other dementia, which may have been caused by, sometimes have different causes. Yes? Other states are using it as well. I think we're about in line with what other states are doing. I mean, it's offered as an option within all with Maine's programs if you get home and community-based services. So one of your options is to say, I prefer not to go through an agency. I prefer to arrange these services myself and have somebody, provide the care with appropriate training. So they tend to be, they're used a lot with the younger physical disabled group, but we also have people with dementia, for example, whose family members are in those systems as well. So they tend to be a little bit small, but I think that they may become of greater interest moving forward. That's a good question. We haven't focused on that so much, but I think that's an area that really needs a lot of work, and we have some information on sort of comorbidities of people, in the long-term care system who may have some mental health diagnoses as well. We have done a little bit of work. We did do a report on looking at people who use long-term services and support, including people with mental health services. I didn't report on it here. We have done some in that area, but I think more and more there's a lot of overlap also between people aging with mental health issues and developmental disability issues becoming a bigger issue as well. So, yep. I know there's one, and others in the room may know better than I. There's one on the coast in, is it Damariscotta? Who's the name of the person that's doing that? Chip Teal, right. And that is a system where they have sort of people remotely. You set up sort of a non-intrusive way to kind of monitor people's movements without, and again, they do it in a very non-intrusive way. And then they have someone remotely who kind of checks in on people to see how well they're doing and sort of provide a resources in that regard. That's one that I'm familiar with. And then, is Brenda here or Francis? You guys going to talk this afternoon a little bit about sort of assistive technology, fairly advanced assistive technology for people with some fairly severe needs. But, I think we're just on the edge of that and really understanding how well that can work and whether it can work. But I think we're going to start pushing the envelope on a lot of these areas. Yes. Oops.
Maine is a very rural state, and when you brought up the issue of transportation, I wonder if Muskie School has discussed the catastrophe that's really going on with the new transportation system, CTS, that's started supposedly providing services for folks across Maine. So I'm curious what Muskie School is saying and discussing about this topic, which is very important, and it seems like it's frankly not working.
Yeah, frankly, we haven't gotten in there. We haven't done any work on that. I know the Department of Human Services involved in that, but we haven't really gone there.
There's a troublemaker in every crowd.
What's that?
There's a troublemaker in every crowd.
Yeah, well, no, we haven't, so, yep.
Does the data that you have any information on addiction recovery as being an element of going into dementia or aging? Are you tracking any of that as a part of an underlying condition?
We haven't done that.
Okay.
I'd be interested in talking to you further about what,
Okay.
what that might mean, but,
Thank you.
but we haven't done that.
Any other questions? Before you go, Jill, I always have tons of questions because there's so much in your information that needs to be dug down into. But you've got a report, the chart book. Can you talk a little bit about what the chart book specifically is about? And you update that, I think, every couple of years.
Yeah, the chart book, I didn't show a lot of it. The chart book actually has information on the use of services in Maine historically, and some projections in terms of the use of nursing homes, the use of residential care facilities, and use of home care services. So there are some interesting trends in there in terms of, we've actually seen declines in the use of nursing homes. They're starting to level off, but there were some declines that were Maine and national between 2000 and sort of 2008-ish. But at the same time, what we're actually seeing is an increase in the use of the residential care. And it's often for that 85-plus group that may have previously been in a nursing home, or maybe they've been in the residential care and they've stayed there. So as we've seen sort of declines in nursing home use in certain areas, we're seeing that increase in that sector of residential care. And, it's worth kind of thinking about what's the best mix here, what's the training and what's the capacity that we need in those areas. So the chart book has a lot of the demographics that I went over. It has a lot on the use of services, and then it has a lot of Maine Care, dollar kind of numbers if anyone is interested in that kind of information. So we do update it. And we're going to be doing an addendum for this this year that will look at people with developmental disabilities, because we haven't included those in the past. So we'll do an addendum this year for people with developmental disabilities. And it also shows supply across the state and the variations in supply across the state. So that's what's in that. Again, for nighttime reading or not, for daytime reading for planning purposes.
Hi, I was just wondering about one other group that might be interesting for you to look at, and that's the informal, formal networks of volunteer groups.
Mm-hmm.
Volunteer groups such as RSVP and the Senior Companion Program, which is a national program that is very evident here in Maine, as well as like church groups and things like
Yep.
that provide informal care for home visiting. So
Yep.
I'm wondering about that.
Well, I mean, the other thing that I think is lacking in terms of what we have available is this just really has the facilities that are mostly for publicly paying people, but we don't really have a good inventory of all that's out there in the private sector as well. And it's very hard to kind of keep track of that inventory because there's kind of no statewide place where that's capped. And so I think looking at, what are all the resources? This is really just a sort of a subset of really all the resources and all the people that are caring for elders in terms of, as you mentioned, the volunteers, family members, churches, area agencies on aging, all of those things. So we definitely a lot more that could be done.
Julie, thank you very much for your
Okay.
presentation.
You're welcome.
And if anyone needs to get in touch with Julie, she is right over here at the Muskie School, although she's very hard to track down. She's so busy, seriously.
Sorry.
No, no, but her work is excellent. And we're going to take a short break. We'll be back here, in 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll have Pam. Feel free to grab a cup of coffee and talk with some of the vendors, and Myron's going to be playing a little bit of blues during the break here. Thank you. hear what you're saying, that it's proven model. And that's what it's- I just like to see that working in Maine. I've been here all my life in Jersey, and looking at the workforce in Maine. I know one thing that will bring people to Maine and potential workers, perhaps legalize marijuana. We'll find a lot of people doing it. Nope, that's the kind of incentive people want. People don't want to come to a state that isn't vibrant and stuff like that. So you're just not going to get people moving to Maine unless you provide that vibrancy. I'm working with Bob Fralich, a doctor who's kind of covers Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. And he made the suggestion, why aren't we doing dementia research here in Maine?
There is some work being done. FHC in Bougainville, they have research going on around that.
I mean substantive research. Because if you bring in a scientist, you don't bring in just the scientists. You bring in their equipment. You bring in their staff. You bring in their assistant, associate scientists. You bring in facilities. You bring in, like a Jackson Lab. We can't afford as a state to sit by and watch while Jackson Labs builds a facility somewhere else. That's what we've lost. Because you bring a lot of expertise. One scientist brings a lot of other expertise to Maine. We don't have a big attraction. I've got a son who works for Cognizant, one of the largest firms in the world. There's no way he would work for Maine. He'd love to Maine. He grew up in Maine. The work environment in Massachusetts is so much different. Innovation is a common term there. We don't understand innovation here in Maine. We just do not understand it. We think that if you paint a mousetrap a different color, that's innovation. That just is not innovation. And so I have a lot of concerns about that report. And I honestly don't think it's
You can back off the numbers. If we make any slight inroad, we're further ahead in the game than we are if we don't do anything.
well, we do need to have action. We need to have action.
And what we're saying is, legislature can put in policies that make structures in place, and part of attracting talent here in Maine is telling our positive story. And there are positive
We've
things
used
that
that,
happen.
too. We've used that quality of place and all work. We've used that, and it hasn't made a difference. We've actually had
2,100 Maine businesses think that the quality of our workforce here, the quality of our people, the quality of our place are key to that.
I understand that what we've been doing hasn't worked, so they can say whatever they want. But what we've been doing has not worked. We can say whatever, study, whatever. It hasn't worked. We don't have a growing workforce. So we've got to do something really radical. We want to bring people to Maine, especially in this industry, in the dementia care industry. Let's build a premier training institute for caregivers and try to find a way to make it really important. You'll get a lot of people come to Maine. And if it's free because they agree to stay for 5 years, awesome. But I don't see the state doing that because the state doesn't have money. I see private business having to decide.
I was curious.
No, I know. I knew that was going to be controversial, but I just think it was. Not the whole report, but the. No. But I read it like most people read it. Most people don't read the whole report. You got to remember when people issue a report, people look maybe at the executive summary. Most people don't get past the title. Okay, so I read it like somebody, and I'll be honest with you, when that was printed in the paper, what that said to most people in Maine is, we've got a solution. We don't need to keep moving. Why is that an issue? I go to tell people we've got a workforce issue.
But if
They
you're
say,
basing
why?
it on it, I'm not going to get into an argument or a debate, but what I'm saying is if you're reading it out of a newspaper report, it's the spin of the reporter. You should read the whole report. And I'm sure that David
Listen,
will refer to
1.3 million in Maine do not read that report. Maybe a couple dozen of us who are interested in details and get off on details, we read the report. And I will read I read the executive summary. But the thing that 99% of people see is that newspaper report and they stop. That's what the perspective is that you have to, that's not what you wanted to communicate, but that's what got communicated to the whole population of Maine. You can't control that message, unfortunately, but that's what people hear.
But then they also hear your comments. So, just hear our point.
Oh, no, I know the need is there. The question is how we wish all the other states would just stop authorizing it so that everybody would come to Maine. If we were the only place that offered it, we'd be in the gold. So those are the things that I think make it a vibrant population. We've got everything else. We've got the geography, we've got the ocean, the mountains, the hunting, the fishing. And in the Portland area, we've got the arts and the culture. We've got all that. So doesn't everybody else.
Interesting. Well, I just wanted you to hear our perspective.
Oh, no, I understand. I do see both sides of those issues.
Hi, just a quick thing. Do you want to try to get people to move down toward?
No.
No, it's just,
No, that's fine.
Okay.
But I appreciate that.
Someone had mentioned it to me.
What time is it anyways?
It's near time.
We're late. No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't have a cell phone.
Oh, you did?
oh, they wanted, my company always likes to get a picture of me speaking somewhere, so.
Let me go round up the troops and we'll get you up. Okay. Now, which kind of mic? Are you going to use this podium mic? Yeah. Yeah. Whatever you want. You can have anything you want. You can have a lapel mic. Okay. All right.
Ken, I have a lay ministry in Connecticut itself, and I'm always prompted when to handle this stuff. That is the
Thank you.
that is the Shaka Kalunka voice and it's a Tibetan voice.
Cool. Oh, Tibetan. Ooh, that's special meaning.
They tell me that the ancient stuff.
Great. Thank you. Brittany, we just started up again.
No, oh, okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, and then I segued into the
Oh, man.
How you doing?
Good man. How you doing?
Very well. Good to meet you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. I'm assisted living is cheaper than home care. So do you have a PowerPoint presentation or
I
something?
do.
Just inside the door on the left is our tech guy.
Okay.
Just make sure he knows what you want. You can have a choice of what mic you want.
Oh, okay. You got lab or okay. Excellent.
Okay?
I'm not good stuck behind a podium.
Oh, cool.
I feel
Yeah, I can have a handout. I like a handout. It's like a security blanket.
right.
And I can...
Either, but yeah. Okay. Perfect.
We're headed back in. Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting ready to start in just a couple minutes. If anyone has requests for the blues, singer. That's Myron. Feel free to ask. He is, isn't he? Good morning, everybody. We're going to move on to the session with Pam Villarreal. And Pam has done some original research dealing with trends in spending. She's done a lot of work in the pre-retirement area, but she's also done some recent work on the post-retirement and the elder spending areas. And the reason this might be important for those of you who are in business, or if you know somebody who's in business, if they really want to know what to plan for the next 5 or 10, 15, 20 years, you kind of got to know who's going to be spending what money and how. Because if you're a car dealer and you realize that 20% of the population is going to stop buying cars every 3 years, that makes a big difference in whether you have inventory or not. You certainly don't want to be stocking up on or you want to be stocking up if you're a pharmacy, for example, on elder care products. And I won't go through the list of what they are, but they do, it all depends, so to say. So there's some product mixes which I don't know that businesses are really prepared to deal with yet, and I'm not sure they've even heard it. And I say that because Pam is probably one of the few people I know that has actually done some analysis in this area. Pam comes to us from Dallas, Texas, southern Maine. And I flew in yesterday and was remarking at how early it gets dark here. You know, those southerners. But I hope you'll greet her. She's going to be here for a couple days, and Pam said she's going to take the mailboat tour around the islands and do I don't get into Portland downtown too often, but there's a bar thing, or pub crawl. I thought that's what you did after you went to the pub. But so she's going to get to know Maine a little bit, and you know, if we're really smart, maybe she'll take some of that information back to her folks in Texas and say, gee, Maine's a really cool place. I'd love to do business there, because Maine is a really cool place. So let me invite Pam Villarreal from the National Center for Policy Analysis. Thank you, Pam. Do you want that one or this one?
Thank you, Ken, for inviting me. I was really thrilled to get invited to this conference because I have always wanted to come to Maine. And my husband has always been, I don't want to go to Maine. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to do this by myself someday. The only thing is I thought I'd be in Maine in the summer. I wasn't expecting to be here the week before Thanksgiving. But so far, I have really enjoyed it. It's just beautiful. So I'm really honored to be here. I also want to let you know, if any of you have a cell phone with a camera, if you wouldn't mind getting a couple pictures of me speaking. My company likes to get pictures of us speaking when we're invited, and I need to let them know that I'm doing things besides drinking beer and eating lobster rolls. So I appreciate that. And then just see me during the break, and you can email them to me. So let me just introduce myself and my organization. I'm with the National Center for Policy Analysis. We are a nonprofit think tank based in Dallas. We have a legislative office in Washington, D.C., and we do a lot of research on public policy issues. Our big area is healthcare policy. Our president is a healthcare economist from Columbia. But my area is retirement and tax issues. We also do some energy and environmental issues and so forth. One thing that we have, one of our successes here at the NCPA is many years ago, if you had reached your full retirement age and you wanted to keep working, you would actually lose Social Security benefit payments. You would lose about 50 cents in benefit payments for every dollar you earned. But we were actually very instrumental in helping to repeal what they call the Social Security earnings test. So now, once you reach your full retirement age, you're actually able to work and still collect all your benefits while you're working. And this really helps people who could use the extra money. make sure I know how this works. Okay. Last year, I did a study on trends in baby boomer spending. What I wanted to know was how the 45 to 64-year-olds are spending their money, and I wanted to compare them to the same people 20 years earlier, because I had become concerned that there were a lot of reports about baby boomers being ill-prepared for retirement, and sadly they still are. So I wanted to look at, what's going on with them? Why are they having so much trouble? And I found some very interesting changes over the past 20 years. So what I'm doing here today is I'm going to talk about the trends in elderly spending, age 65 and up, and I'm comparing them to about 1990 to see what is changing. Is our elderly population spending on various different things than they did 20 years ago? And there's some very surprising information. So the questions I have are, what are they spending money on, the largest components? And this information is based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey that comes out every year. A very detailed survey. There's about 25,000 households in this age group. They divide them into two groups, 65 to 74 and 75 and up. And I would imagine eventually they're going to have to start a third group because there's more people living beyond the age of 100. And they would probably also have some different spending habits. The respondents are all people who are in a home or they're in an assisted living apartment, but they do not include anybody in a nursing home. So obviously, if there are nursing home expenditures, those will not be picked up in this case. I'm also going to be looking at some information on debt among this group from the Survey of Consumer Finances, which is put out by the Federal Reserve Bank every 3 years. Okay, so first I want to give you some interesting facts about retirees. First of all, they actually have a lower poverty rate than the general population. They have actually had the lowest rate among their group since 1993. The poverty rate is about 9.1 for seniors, much lower than the national average. Now, one thing to bear in mind is there are many alternative poverty measures that are used by the census, and they're not mainstream, but they do look at some different areas. And one of them is a measure that actually deducts out-of-pocket medical expenses from seniors' incomes. When you do that, their poverty rate is slightly higher. Actually, it's much higher. It's about 14.8%. Another thing is that seniors' expenditures have increased at about 1% per year since 1990. That's adjusting for inflation. Now, one of the questions is, well, how much has their income increased? When you look at the BLS data, you see that their income has increased about 1.7% per year. But there's some problems with the income reporting in the BLS data. Before 2004, they used to not impute missing income numbers. They started doing that in 2004. But what often happens is people tend to underreport their income. They don't often report income that there might be some income involved that they receive cash for doing certain things, and it's not reported on their tax forms. So what I decided to do was actually look at the share of their expenditures and see how that has changed over time, because I felt like the income reporting was not very accurate. Another thing is that more seniors carry a mortgage or home equity type loan than in 1990. This is something that I also noticed among the baby boomers. There's a lot of mortgage debt. So the question is, do we have seniors that are obtaining mortgage debt once they retire, or are they carrying mortgage debt from their baby boomer years into their senior years? That's a huge expenditure. More older seniors own, the 75 and up crowd, own or lease at least one car. Now, this is not surprising because I just read an article the other day that seniors are driving more miles. They're driving for longer years, and they're driving, they're able to drive. Well, I take that back. I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. I know there are a lot of states that have actually passed laws that require people of a certain age to do a driving test. So, but the fact of the matter is more seniors have a car than they did before. They're driving later into their years, and they're driving more miles. Finally, more seniors are in the workforce than in 1990. For people over the age of 65, about 21% are still in the workforce. 8.6% of 75 and olders are still working. And this is actually about double the rate back in 1990. Now, what we don't know is, are they working out of necessity, or are they just bored and want to continue working in some capacity? And this is actually defined as 35 hours a week. Now, the one thing I really wanted to do with this data set was I wanted to ferret out the Maine respondents, because they're respondents from all states. The problem is in the data set is not all the states are coded, so there was a lot of blanks. So when I tried to ferret out Maine people age 65 and over, I think I got 23 respondents. But there's obviously more, because as I said, there was a lot of state codes that were missing. And I knew I couldn't get very good data on 23 respondents. So the data I'm presenting is really for not Maine specific, I wish it would be, but it's really for the United States in general. Okay, so let's look first at the largest expenditure categories for our 65 to 74-year-olds. The first one is housing. This does not even include principal payments. This is mortgages, interest on mortgages, home equity loans, property taxes and insurance, expenses for property management, homeowners insurance, expenses for repairs, maintenance, materials that they buy and do their own home repairs, or any repairs that they call somebody to come out and do. Also for this group, we have transportation. This includes vehicle purchases, net outlays on new and used vehicles, so it'd be minus the trade-in value of a previous vehicle, gasoline, motor oil, maintenance repairs, vehicle insurance, public transportation, rental leases, licenses, state and local registrations. If you're a member of an automobile service club, that is included in there as well. And then their third expenditure is food, and this will be food both in and away from home. And so the percentages here are the share of their total expenditures that goes to these categories. And then the dollar amount next to that is the average amount that was reported in 2012. So the fourth expenditure category is health care. Now this includes all out-of-pocket health care expenses except for Medicare Part B. As you probably know, Medicare Part B comes out of their Social Security checks. But this includes any expenses that are not reimbursed out of pocket. Also, if they purchase Medigap insurance, it includes the premiums that are paid toward Medigap and any deductibles. Finally, for this age category, personal insurance and pensions make up about 6.3% of their total expenditures. This includes life insurance, any non-health insurance other than home or vehicle, private pension contributions, government pension contributions, self-employed, and Social Security payroll taxes. So what this includes is the employee portion of the Social Security payroll tax if the respondent is working. Interestingly enough, and not surprisingly, things change for the 75 and older group. Housing is still their largest expenditure, but health care comes in second. Of course, this is not surprising at all. Transportation comes in third. More 75-year-olds are buying new and used cars. Very interesting. And then we have food. Cash contributions kind of surprised me. 7.9% of their expenditures. And this includes contributions to religious charities, educational, political organizations. It also includes care of students away from home. And I have to tell you something. There are more people 65 and up who are paying for kids in college, or they're paying their student loans. It's actually pretty shocking. These are kids, or actually I want to call them, young adults who get out of college, they can't find a job, so they have their aging parents helping to pay off their student loans. And this is a huge and growing expenditure. So when you look at the difference here between our young seniors and our older seniors, you see that health care is second for this age group, not surprisingly, and it's fourth for the younger seniors. So let's dig into health care expenditures a little bit. You often hear that seniors are spending a huge amount of money on health care expenditures, and they have to decide between purchasing prescription drugs and groceries. But really, when you look at the health care expenditures, they have remained fairly unchanged over the past 20 years. When you look at your 65 to 74-year-olds, you see that their health insurance is about 2% annual, and then their medical supplies are about 3.4%. Now, for the 75-year-olds, we have health insurance. Then we break it down into medical supplies and medical services. Now, medical supplies are out-of-pocket expenses for things like canes, eyeglasses, the hover-round, you probably see a lot of those ads, wheelchairs, any types of supplies. And then medical services is out-of-pocket expenditures for physician services and so forth. That also includes hospital room services, eye and dental care, lab tests, and x-rays. Now, just so you know, just for some comparison, since this does not include the Part B premiums, the Part B premiums in 2012 were $99.90 for each individual. And in 2013, they were $104.90. Also, Part A is part of the payroll taxes that are paid into the system. And you don't pay a premium on Part A, but you do have a deductible of $1,156. And Part A is actually the hospitalization. Part B deductible in 2012 was about $140. So what I like to look at is the fastest growing expenditures. Now bear in mind, just because an expenditure is fast growing doesn't mean it makes up a huge share of their purchases. But since 1990, it's been very interesting to look and see what the expenditures are that are growing. And this is an average annual growth in the share of expenditures that are going toward these items. The first one is education. Now, education is kind of an interesting topic because when I talked earlier about cash contributions, there were some cash contributions include supporting students that are away from home. So some of the cash contribution and some of the education may be somewhat misreported. Cash contributions would typically include supplies, or not really supplies, but apartment rent or anything that helps the student actually living away from home. Whereas education would include things like tuition, fees, textbooks, supplies, and equipment for college, but also public and private nursery schools, elementary, high schools, colleges. What's very interesting about this category is it is growing way above any of the other categories for 65 to 74-year-olds. It's growing on an average of about 14.3% a year. So there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, we have people that are helping to pay education expenses for their college attendees. But also, more grandparents are helping raise their grandkids. They say right now that about 1 in 10 children are raised by a grandparent. 2.5 million grandparents are raising kids now. This is the largest percentage in 40 years. So not only do we have education expenses for college students, but we also have education expenses for, say, kindergarten, private school, any type of preschool education, any supplies for kids that are in grade school, because we have grandparents who are raising these grandchildren, and a lot of it has to do with the economic hardships that the parents have, or they may have a problem with drug abuse, or they may be in prison. So there's an increasing reliance of children on their grandparents. Miscellaneous entertainment. Now, when we think of seniors as financially struggling, we have to bear in mind that for this age group, miscellaneous entertainment is growing at about 9.8% per year. This includes exercise equipment, bicycles, trailers, renting an RV, camping equipment, hunting and fishing equipment, sports equipment. It includes boats, boat motors, boat trailers, and rentals of boats. So it's obvious they have some leeway, they have some cushion as far as this is not what I would consider to be a necessity, so to speak, but they do have some interests and some hobbies that they're spending on. The third category that's growing is new cars and trucks. This is not surprising considering that seniors are driving longer. People in this age category are probably thinking, okay, I'm going to drive till I'm 90. I think I better buy a new car that'll last me till I'm 90. I mean, cars can last 15 to 20 years now. Also, what I thought was interesting was pets and hobbies. The percentage of money being spent on pets, the percentage of share of expenditures, has actually doubled since 1990. This is not at all surprising either, because they've shown that, I think medical research has shown that pets are very good for seniors. They provide comfort, they help lower blood pressure. They say that if you own pets, you tend to live longer. And then our last fastest growing expenditure for this age group is used cars and trucks, which are about 4.3%. And then this last column here is actually the share of expenditures going toward these purchases for the year 2012. Now, as I said before, some of these are very small, like education, miscellaneous entertainment, but the point is that they're growing faster than any of the other expenditure groups. Okay, so looking at our 75-year-olds, pensions and Social Security in this area are actually the fastest growing expenditures for this group. And I have an idea as to why this is. We have more 75-year-olds who are working. So even if they're collecting retirement benefits, they're still paying into the system. Some of them may actually still be contributing to a Roth IRA, which they can contribute to indefinitely. But the reason I put this in parentheses is because what I wanted to do was look at the tangible expenditures that they're spending money on, although this pensions section is still the largest growing expenditure for this age group. But look at this. We have new cars and trucks, vehicle finance charges, and used cars and trucks that are growing faster than any of the other expenditures except for pensions. Again, this is not surprising. There is a world out there where older people are driving. They're driving more. They're driving longer. Actually, it's kind of funny. My father is 79, and he races cars. He does that as a hobby on the weekends. And I dread the day when I have to tell him that he can't drive anymore. And my sister and I are having this argument over who's going to tell him. And I hope that she does it, because it's going to be very difficult to tell him that. And then again here we have pets, toys, and hobbies. 5.9% average growth a year, and $368 a year spent on pets. And then finally, we have mortgage, interest, and charges. This is a kind of a disturbing trend, because I said there are more people that are carrying mortgages into retirement, or they're already digging into their home equity when maybe they should put off doing that. And I'm going to get into this in a little bit more later, but as I said, this is growing at 4.6%. We have about 2% of their expenditures going toward that. So let's look at some good news, some declining expenditures. So for our 65 to 74-year-olds, the first major declining expenditure is the miscellaneous category, and I will define that. That includes safety deposit box rentals, checking account fees, finance charges, bank service charges, any finance charges associated with credit cards, legal fees, accounting fees, cemetery plots, occupational expenses. So any finance charges for anything other than the home or vehicle. In some ways, this is good news because this finance charge category would also include credit cards. So it tells me that this age group is trying to get down some credit card debt. Vehicle finance charges are declining as well. Now, before, they were actually increasing for the 75 and up group. But for 65 to 74-year-olds, they are declining. This is not surprising because vehicle interest charges right now are pretty much at an all-time low. Apparel is falling. Clothing is actually getting cheaper as a share of your real income, and that's because a lot of it is made overseas. Natural gas. This is also not surprising at all. Over the past 20 years, natural gas prices have actually fell by half. Down in Texas, we rely heavily on natural gas for heating. And I think my bills are the lowest they have ever been in my whole life. Vehicle maintenance and repairs are actually falling. This is due to the fact that cars, you don't need to maintain them as often. You know, now there are many cars where you can get an oil change maybe once a year. You don't have to go every 3,000 miles. So cars are lasting longer and they don't require as much upkeep. Okay, so let's look at the declining shares of expenditures for our 75-year-olds. And of course, they are slightly different. Food is declining as a share of expenditures. This is a very interesting category, prescription drugs. They are actually falling by about 0.76%. It's very small, but this is significant, and I'll tell you why. After about 1985, there was some legislation that was passed to allow the growth of the generic drug industry, and it is growing tremendously. So there are more people that are buying generic drugs. I don't guess you have Walmart stores here, but where I live, you can go to Walmart and get a 3-month supply of a generic drug for $10. And they have about 1,000 different drugs on their formulary. Also, back in 2003, we implemented Medicare Part D. That has actually been a very competitive program. Most government programs aren't that competitive, but Medicare Part D has really helped to keep prescription drug costs down. So this is an area where seniors are seeing benefits of basically the free market. Natural gas, electricity, and heating oil are also areas that have fallen. Again, this is not at all surprising. Utilities, with the exception of telephone, utilities in general have fallen for most age groups. Okay, so let's talk about seniors and debt, because we have to face the fact that more seniors are in debt now than ever before. Okay, so this chart here shows the percentage of people 65 and up, just all in general, that have a mortgage. The blue line is for people that are 65 to 74. Now this data is based on the Survey of Consumer Finances, and as you can see, back in 1989, 21% of 65 to 70-year-olds carried a mortgage or a home equity loan. This is now 37%. What's even more surprising, though, is for 75-year-olds, 6% had a mortgage or home equity loan in 1989. And by 2010, it's 21% now. So 3 times the amount of people have a home equity or mortgage as they did before. And of course, amazingly, for both interest payments as a share of expenditures has increased. What I find very disturbing about this trend is interest right now. The interest rates have been at an all-time low, but people are paying more dollars in the amount of interest. So that tells me a few things about the housing market, and I went and did some research. The average 30-year fixed mortgage in 1990 for the interest rate was about 10%. In 2010, it was 4.69%. Yet, as I said before, people are paying more dollars to mortgage interest. The average age of the first-time home buyer has increased fairly significantly. In 1985, it was 28. In 2011, it was 35. Is say 40 and they're buying a first-time home and they take out a 30-year mortgage, which is very common now, they're going to have that mortgage till they're 70. Also, the median down payment has declined significantly. The first-time home buyer in 1989 had to put down at least 10%, compared to only 2% in 2007. Again, this is a result of all the loans that have proliferated with no down payment, very little interest. For repeat buyers buying a second home or, downsizing or upsizing, it was 23% in 1989 compared to 16% in 2007. So one problem is with seniors is the availability of mortgages and lower interest rates and, less concern with credit has actually been bad for them. So this is from the Survey of Consumer Finances. This is the average value of mortgage debt for 65 and over. For 65 to 74-year-olds, back in 1989, it was $27,100. This does not include interest payments. For the same group in 2010, it's $124,000. And look at our 75-plus group. $35,500 for them back in 1989, again, not including interest, and $82,900 for them in 2010. Okay, so we have another debt that we're dealing with. We've all heard of it. We all deal with it, credit card balances. This is particularly shocking. So in 1989, for 65 to 74-year-olds, the average debt was $2,100. And it's now about $6,000. But for our 75-year-olds, I put 0 because the average debt was negligible. As a matter of fact, in the data set, it had a little slash mark because there wasn't even enough to record there. And now it's up to $4,600. Now, some would argue that, well, that's all attributable to medical debt, but we don't know that because so many things go on credit cards. So if you purchased some expensive furniture or some pet supplies or whatever and you have medical expenses on there, we don't really know what tips the balance or causes some people to go into bankruptcy. It's usually actually a variety of debt. Okay, so let me present a little good news. Okay, this is from the Survey of Consumer Finances. What this is the mean median ratio of net worth. And what this is the average value of net worth per age group divided by the median value. The larger the number, the more disparities there are in net worth. And net worth, as you probably know, is your total worth minus your liability, your total assets minus liabilities. The amazing thing is when you look at these numbers, 75-year-olds are in a better position. And what that means is they have net worth, but there's not huge disparities in the net worth among different people. And the people who are worse off is your 35 to 44-year-olds. In fact, I think for seniors, the average net worth is about 600,000 something. I don't have the exact number. And the median is about 200,000. So when you look at your 65 to 74-year-olds and your 75-year-olds, they're actually doing better as far as wealth equality than the other age groups. So one thing my organization does is we look at policies that might be driving some of these. And some of my conclusions here are more personal, some of them are more policy related. But one of the things that's going on is interest payments are consuming a greater share of senior expenditures. And some of these could probably be eliminated. On a personal level, we tend to have a culture that encourages us to buy a lot of house. We get mortgage deductions. We have very easy loans. Of course, that's tightened up a little bit since the housing crisis in '08. But some of it could really be eliminated if people were to try to live more in their means and maybe buy a smaller house or not have to buy the brand new car. Another thing is tax policy, and this is for all age groups. It tends to encourage consumption over saving. You can deduct your sales tax, at least in my state we can because we don't have a state income tax. You can deduct mortgage interest. But with the exception of a tax-deferred retirement account, you're generally punished for savings. When you earn dividends for savings, you have to pay tax on the dividends. So we have a public policy that encourages consumption over saving. And I can see why, because consumption is about 70% of our GDP, so without it we wouldn't have as much growth as we do, but it can put people into a lot of trouble. But as I said before, seniors as a whole are in a better position as far as net worth compared to other age groups. So they're not just, we usually often hear of seniors either taking being able to travel around the world and have all this money, or they're having to pick between groceries and drugs, or they're eating cat food. But really the reality is somewhere in the middle. And finally, will spendthrift boomers equal spendthrift retirees? One disturbing trend among boomers is they tend to spend a lot of money and maybe not save enough. And if you grew up with a family that spent a lot of money, or if you've been spending a lot of money all your life or living beyond your means, or having credit card issues, thank you, then you don't stop behaving that way when you become retired. It's a mindset, but you have to learn that behavior over time. I'm not saying everybody is like that, but the point is, if you had trouble managing your money when you were 40 or 50, you're going to have trouble managing your money when you're 60, 70, and 80. You don't just retire and say, okay, I'm going to cut back, because it doesn't happen that way. It's really definitely a mindset. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm questions. Yes, ma'am.
I was surprised to see on the over age 75 group that you didn't see a growing trend for private duty home care services. Support in the home to help them stay in their homes. Did you notice that at all?
Actually, the survey divides up into 4 categories, and I think that one would actually be under services. Any out-of-pocket, and this only records out-of-pocket expenditures. One thing I will say about home care is I used to do quite a bit of research on Medicaid, and some Medicaid programs are very receptive to allowing what they call cash and counseling, where people can, where they can provide funds for people to care for elderly at home. But not all of them are like that. Sadly, for example, in Ohio, there have been attempts to provide more cash and counseling, but usually the nursing home lobby actually fights it because they feel like it will take away from the residency in their nursing home. So obviously, this being an average, it would really also depend on what state you're in, and I don't have the states broken down. But any expenses that are out of pocket for private home care will be considered medical services. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Actually, I don't have them with me. I can email them to you, but I think the average was around 600,000 and the median was around 200,000. Because what you do is you take the average and divide it by the median to get the ratio. And as I said, the smaller the number, the less disparities are in net worth among the individuals. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, it does. And that's one thing that I've also been looking at is people are having children, as I mentioned about housing, people are buying houses at a later age, first-time home buyers. People are having children at a later age. And that affects a couple things. It affects the education, as you mentioned. They still may be paying for children's education. And also it affects their, typically when you get married or you have a family or whatever, you go and buy a house. And all that is happening much later. So I think a lot of these expenses that normally ended in your 50s are carrying into 60s and 70s. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Check, check. Check, check. Check, check. Mic check, 1, 2.